As you reflect back, you have a little bit of time and look back at Adesanya Blachowicz. Like many fights are like a fine wine that they get better with time. And I realize that time is of hours at this point, but it's still one of those things where Blachowicz is going to get the credit that he should get later. He just is. He will never get the full credit for what he did walking it against Adesanya as a 3-1 underdog. Not to mention figuring it out, not to mention getting the fight done on the feet and on the ground, showing a little bit of everything. Showing conditioning, showing his ability to reserve himself and make it the distance. I mean, there's a lot of things that he did very well. I feel as though Blachowicz will never get the credit that he deserves for being brought in as a sacrificial lamb to get beat up by Dominic Reyes. Which, by the way, is the same role that Blachowicz was supposed to play when he got brought in to fight Luke Rockhold. Luke Rockhold was the big name, moving up from 85, going to step into 205, cruise right off into a match with Jon Jones. I mean, that was the story at that time. And all of those stories have one constant divisible, which is Jan Blachowicz winning. Blachowicz then, after the fight, calls out Glover Teixeira, and by call out, it was more that he mentioned Glover's name. Jan was extremely respectful. And when you call out Glover Teixeira, which very few men have had the courage to do, you're also in this particular case calling out the rightful guy. You're calling out the rightful number one contender. So you're attempting to show a respect, not only to the sport and your competitors, but to the integrity of the division. It's a rare thing. I wouldn't really care if a guy did that or not, if he wanted to go in the direction of calling out a bigger fight that he could get bigger attention to, right? I mean, what's the rule? The rule is you call for the biggest paycheck against the easiest opponent. Wherever you can fall in between that, you're showing an intelligence to yourself. If Blachowicz wants to go after the toughest guy, he's going to call out the baddest dudes, and then whoever gets sent to him, whether he gets his call out or not, he's willing to step in and face. You can't really question a guy like that. You can't really question a guy calling for a number one contender. But by the way, whether he gets him or not, he's going to show up for who anybody they put in there, he's going to show up against. And this seems to be the story of Blachowicz, which I don't know he fully gets elevated for. And I think that he should. And it seems as though those things are changing very fast. And not to mention, stylistically, Glover versus Blachowicz, that's going to be a very interesting line when that comes out. I know what you guys are thinking. Well, Blachowicz is going to be the favorite. I agree. He probably will be the favorite. But if you start to think about that fight, start to think of some of the stand-up power of Blachowicz, and then you put that with the ability to take a shot and return a shot by Glover, and then you factor in the wrestling, which is the intangible, which appears to favor Teixeira until we saw Blachowicz hit the first two takedowns of his whole career, and he did them simultaneously in rounds 4 and 5 against a guy that Yoel Romero had 25 minutes and only got down one time. I mean, you start to see where all I'm saying is this starts to be an interesting conversation. That's all I'm not even attempting to have the conversation. I'm attempting to prove the point that we can have some real fun with that. And I don't know for sure that's the direction it's going to go, but it appears that way. I think you'd have a very hard time making a case against Glover Teixeira. I think we're pretty safe to say that that's the match that's going to happen. And the only curveball that could have come in would be Jon Jones reinserting himself, which he didn't do, or Adesanya demanding a rematch and putting some kind of an interesting spin on this that he did not do. So I think we're pretty safe when we're looking at Glover getting a title shot, which that's a feel-good story, isn't it? Glover Teixeira's entire UFC career has been a feel-good story. Glover Teixeira is this guy that's getting vouched for by Chuck Liddell himself, that people had seen Glover in the practice room. Guys like John Hackelman, whose opinion matters. Dana White, whose opinion matters, but they couldn't get it. It was like a visa issue. There was something with getting Glover into the organization, and it wasn't the country. He was living in California. Glover had even come out to Oregon and fought Ed Herman in a show that used to be called Sport Fight, that I was there. I saw it. I bring that to you because I know it was never an issue with getting Glover into the country. But if you go Google this, that's the story that's out there, that he had some kind of a visa issue and couldn't get in the States. That's not true, but there was some reason he couldn't get into the organization. I bring that to you because he then took the fast path. And he's taken the fast track, and he's in there with some hard fights. I remember second fight, third fight that Glover had, he's locked in there with Rampage Jackson. They fight the distance. That elevates Glover to a title shot with Jon Jones somewhere along the way. Dana gets so impressed with him, he gives him a car. Glover got like this cool truck along. I mean, the whole thing was a feel-good story, though. That would probably make you jealous. This guy got a car. But it was one of these things where you were really happy that Glover got it. Like, finally something's going his way. And Glover had won 21 fights. He'd won 22 fights. It was something silly that he had won before he got into the UFC. And I mean in a row. Like, he went on this run. I know Sokaju was on that list somewhere, like some names that you would really appreciate. As a matter of fact, when I brought up Glover's fight with Ed Herman, I believe that was Glover's last loss until he lost to Jon Jones. He won like two dozen fights between that match, that little small match that happened at a community college right here in Oregon, and the next thing, pay-per-view headliner with Jon Jones. Like, it was just this feel-good story. And now for Glover to come out 40 plus, true number one contender, right? Went through everybody, including Anthony Smith along the way. He's a true number one contender. For him to not only get his opportunity, but be called for the opportunity by the new young champion in Blachowicz. Like, just the whole thing feels right, which in many ways is anticlimactic for fight promotion. I get that. But as far as a story that we can get behind, that is the right story, the right guy at the right time, Glover Teixeira, Jan Blachowicz,